video comes at the request of a couple of people who've asked me to cover this topic over the last couple of months. And to be quite honest, I probably am not the best one to cover this topic because I have a hard time relating to a lot of it, and so a lot of this is just guesswork. But I figured I'd at least start this conversation. For those of you who've got more experience than I do, please feel free to make comments in the comment section. Please feel free to post in the Facebook group, point out where I'm wrong, point out where you've got differing opinions, and absolutely feel free to expound on anything that I say to provide information to everybody else out there. All right, so the topic today is a couple of things. Specifically, I was asked to talk about the Monroe focus levels, but I'm going to add one more thing to that topic at the end. So Robert Monroe, if you've read his books, he breaks down the progression of his states of consciousness into focus levels. And these are arbitrary numbers that he decided he would assign to these various states that he goes through, that he perceives on the way into an out-of-body experience, and then actually beyond while he's in the out-of-body state. So I was asked to just give my thoughts on these focus levels and kind of describe what each one is and how it relates to, I guess, to my practice or to how I perceive my progress or my progression level to go as well. So the very first one is focus one. That one's easy. That's one that everybody experiences. It's the same thing that he calls C1 consciousness. It's every day, wide awake, walking around. I don't think there will be a lot of discrepancy on that one. The next one is called Focus 10, and this one is one I can absolutely relate to as well. Again, I don't think there will be a lot of differing in opinion on this one. Focus 10 is mind awake, body asleep. So it's your body has gone to sleep, you were able to maintain conscious control over your mind and keep it awake while your body's shut down. All right, so the next one, Focus 11. This one, I have no idea what he's talking about, to be quite honest. So again, feel free to chime in. It is called the Access Channel, the ultimate communication channel to all levels of awareness, mental, physical, and emotional. The only thing that I can think of is that I know that when you are in a very deep state of meditation, hypnosis, things like that, that you have the ability to, I suppose, subconsciously act on suggestion a lot more effectively than you would be able to while you're wide awake. So quitting smoking, for example, if you're in a hypnotic trance and the suggestion is given to you that you no longer will crave cigarettes, then that can be a lasting impression on your subconscious mind. So when I think about this ultimate communication to all levels, and he mentions the mental, physical, and emotional, possibly he's just saying that this is a point where these three different areas are all connected enough to where they can communicate effectively, but that's just a guess. I can't say this is one I've physically, consciously ever experienced. All right, so next one, Focus 12, a state of expanded awareness while the body remains deeply relaxed and asleep. This one, I relate personally to the point in my practice where my mind just clicks back on and is crystal clear. So there is a point in this process where it is incredibly difficult to keep your mind awake because we're so used to letting our minds fall asleep first and then the body follows. Well, when you switch that process around and let your body fall asleep first while keeping your mind awake, there's a point where that gets very, very difficult. But if you get past that point, the moment that my body shuts off and I feel that wave of sleep paralysis move up my body, it's like my mind just says, great, you did it, your body's asleep, you're done, I can go back to my normal waking conscious level of lucidity. And so my mind just goes click, and it's just wide awake as though a light switch were flipped. So that's what I personally relate this one to. If you've got other interpretations, feel free to share those. All right, so Focus 15, a state of no time. Consciousness is now far removed from the physical body's signals. This is pretty clearly, well, to me, the interpretation is pretty clearly the void state. So when you are in the void state, when you're in this state where your mind is wide awake, but your senses have shut off, your body has shut off, you've got this disassociation from the physical world, it feels like you are floating in this point, the space of no time with no connection to the physical. And he says you're now removed far from your physical bodily signals, and that is absolutely the case. You couldn't tell what position you were lying in if you wanted to, whether your arms are by your sides or laying on your chest or your legs are crossed. it's just it's an impossible thing to tell when you're in that state. So I believe that that is focus 15. Now here is where we get to the point where I don't even have a guess. At some point during this process, obviously you reach the point where you perceive that separation and you actually reach the out-of-body state. But in his focus levels, he doesn't talk about the vibrational state. He doesn't talk about the separation. So we'll continue. I'm going to go ahead and go through all of them, and then we can have some discussion about this. So focus 21, on the very edge of perception of time, of the time-space continuum, and your mind remains fully conscious and active. To me, that just, it sounds like more of the void state, maybe a deeper version of that, but again, strictly my own interpretation and not a great one, I'm sure. All right, focus 22 is the next one. On the border between space-time and non-physical states of being. Comatose is the descriptive word he uses there. Continuing on, focus 23, the condition in which an individual may find him or herself immediately following physical death. So now that sounds like an NDE, and obviously to experience an NDE, or to experience an out-of-body experience or a projection, you don't need to experience an NDE, which leads me to believe that focus 21 or 22 have something to do with the separation and the actual projection of the double of your non-physical body. I don't see that in the description, so it's difficult for me to say which one of those focus levels it actually relates to. Focus 24, the site of non-physical activity generated by simple, primitive, religious, and cultural beliefs. Now, focus 24, interestingly, I think that he's talking about consensus realities. And I've had experiences with consensus realities. One of those I still need to record and post because it was an interesting one. And I suppose that maybe that comes after 23, because 23 is what he says is following physical death. But you don't need to have had physical death to in order to experience a consensus reality, because I've been to consensus realities where people are continuing on with their daily life, or they know that they have passed on and now they're basically just experiencing this afterlife. Robert Monroe talks about the same thing. Robert Bruce talks about the same thing. William Buellman talks about the same thing. It's a very common thing. It's consensus realities are something that just a lot of people have come across. So I believe that would be 24, although an OBE is perfectly satisfactory in order to reach a consensus reality. No death required. All right, so focus 25, the expression of the major organized religious beliefs in recent human history. Now again, to me, it sounds like consensus reality. It sounds like, and maybe he perceived these two things differently. Maybe there was a difference between the place you go after you live on this earth and the organizations in the afterlife that were generated by religious thought. So heavens, the hells, the various, purgatory, things like that. Possibly he perceived those as different, but again, not having enough experience to be able to make some sort of distinction between those two, I can't say for sure. Focus 26. Here are identified certain areas, few in number, containing the structures and knowledge of various highly individual religious and other beliefs based on direct experience of self. No idea. Please enlighten me if you understand what that's all about. Focus 27, the edge of human thought capacity, the site of a way station for rest and recovery from the trauma of physical death. So this is something I've never seen, but I've known people to write about it. There's a few different authors that write about this, and I believe it also goes by the name The Park. So this place for rest and recovery from trauma of death, there are a few different people who talk about the idea of a park, or this big green, sort of a gathering area where people go and they meet loved ones after they die. They have a chance to just hang out and recover from trauma, especially from traumatic type deaths. I think it's, I hope I'm saying this right, but I think it's Bruce Moan who talks about 9/11 and talks about how he did soul retrieval for that and helped bring people to the park. I believe it was Bruce Moan. So I think that's what that's talking about, focus 27. I've never specifically, personally been to the park, so difficult for me to say exactly, but I believe that's what that was referring to. All right, so in focus 34 and 35, he puts together in the same group. He says, it is the area of the gathering. Beings from many locations within the physical universe are gathered to witness the upcoming Earth changes. This was first mentioned by Bob Monroe in Far Journeys, and I don't know anybody else who's ever talked about this. It seems like sort of a community that's able to see the future of the Earth, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know anybody else who's mentioned it. I've never experienced anything like this. I'm not sure what else this would relate to. Focus 42 is the I there cluster consciousness. All right, so if you haven't read Bob Monroe's books, the idea of an I there is probably foreign. What Bob found as he was going through these various experiences is that whether it was some aspect of his consciousness or whether it was his spirit or his soul, existed in multiple places at the same time. So he had his I here, his I being here on this physical existence on Earth, but he would experience what he called his I there, his consciousness or his spirit or his soul or whatever it is that was traveling, his non-physical being. He would experience himself in other realities, in other places, living in other communities, in other times where he would sometimes jump in and take the place of somebody else who was living in that reality and participate in their life for a point of time. So this, again, Bob Monroe is the only one that I've ever heard talk about an I there, or an existence in multiple planes of reality at the same time where you can jump between those and experience those different existences. Existences. I've never made it to that point. This is getting pretty far out there. Focus 49 is the last one, and that is C, S-E-A, C of I there, clusters. Again, not even sure what he's talking about there. Sounds like a cluster of I there's, multiple versions of yourself or your various conscious entities throughout the different planes, I suppose. Not sure. So I am positive that wasn't very helpful for a lot of people because I don't have a lot of insight into his focus levels. The way he just picked these numbers kind of out of the air, he picked them specifically so that they wouldn't relate to anything else. He didn't want somebody to see that number and say, oh, I know exactly what that is. He wanted to be able to define this new methodology for describing this process. And that was great for him. I love the way that he explains things and the way that he kind of puts things in his own terms. He creates his own acronyms. But at the same time, it often makes things very difficult to relate to. At least I have found personally. So a lot of these they're hard for me to really describe. What I do want to talk about before we end this, though, is the descriptions that Bob Monroe came up with that I can relate to very strongly. And this was his conditions A through D. So he came up with a whole different set of milestone markers in the road on the way to a projection that are laid out in his first book, Journeys Out of the Body. And these, instead of calling them focus levels, he called them conditions A, B, C, and D. And after reading his focus levels, I found these four things very refreshing because they were things that I could physically strive for and that I could actually physically watch for. And I would see the changes happen in myself, and I would say, oh, I know exactly where I am because I can match this up against Bob's timeline and his kind of signposts of progression in the process. All right, so condition A, he says, is the ability to hold calmly the borderland state indefinitely with your mind on a single exclusive thought. So that's something I do all of the time. Every time I'm trying to reach the void state, and I've talked about this in my videos, with my mind, I focus on something repetitive and monotonous, something to keep my mind busy, a single point of thought, whether that's counting, whether that's focusing on my breaths, my heartbeats, whatever that may be, that single point of thought. And it allows you to maintain this state of consciousness indefinitely. Now, at this point, we're not on the borderland of sleep. We're not in the void state. It is basically the ability to lay there, maintain control over your state of consciousness, and focus on one thing. Condition A. So that was a very straightforward set of instructions that I could then follow and try to achieve. Second, condition B. Do not think of anything, but remain poised between wakefulness and sleep. Simply look through your closed eyelids at the blackness ahead of you and do nothing more. You've accomplished condition B when you're able to lie there indefinitely after the impressions have faded away with no nervousness and seeing nothing but blackness. All right, so at this point, he's talking about you've passed through the hypnagogic imagery. So we all, on the way into this process, we see little flashes of light, little color patterns, sometimes images. Occasionally we hear things, and we've passed through that point. We're now on the borderland of awake and asleep. All right, so it's a little bit different than condition A. Condition A is you can stay awake forever, focusing on one thought. Condition B is you now have let yourself relax to the point where you've passed through the hypnagogic state, you're on that borderland of awake and asleep, and you can now maintain that borderland state indefinitely. And I would say that this was the most challenging piece for me personally to learn, because this is the piece where you have to retrain your mind and your body to switch orders and let your body fall asleep first. All right, so at this point, your body begins to go numb, and the disassociation from your body begins, and then you're on to condition C. So condition C is a systematic deepening of consciousness while in the B state. This approach is done by carefully letting go of your rigid hold on the borderland edge of sleep and drifting deeper and deeper, little by little, during each exercise. You will be able to establish degrees of this deepening of consciousness by going down to a given level and then returning at will. You'll recognize these degrees by the shutting down of various sensory mechanisms. The sense of touch apparently goes first. You'll seem to have no feeling in any part of your body. The sense of smell and taste follow. Auditory signals are next, followed by vision. All right, so this was a great description. This was something that helped me out a lot, at least in building my signposts in the road to know where I was at. And if you notice here, he doesn't use the word, but he's talking about microsleep. He's talking about letting go on that borderland state just briefly and then pulling yourself out through what he says by returning at will. So he doesn't actually say I'm falling asleep. He doesn't use the word microsleep, but that dipping in and out and returning at will sounds very much to me like microsleep. So I'm fairly convinced, just by reading this statement of Bob Monroe's, that this was a part of his practice, that microsleep was part of that. And that made me happy, because it's a huge part of what I do, and it makes things possible for me. All right, so then he talks about the shutting down of senses, which is absolutely what I go through, and it was really, really great to hear that somebody with decades and decades of experiences these same things. It is always great to find commonalities in experiences, to just know that you are on the right track for one, that you're not crazy for another. So he talks about the sense of touch goes first. That is definitely the case. He says smell and taste soon follow. Now, I'll tell you, I don't notice these because they're, it may be that they do shut down. I don't have anything really to taste while I'm laying there in bed, and I don't notice my sense of taste shutting down. I don't notice any particularly strong smells. Maybe I should burn incense or something during this process, and then it would be noticeable when my sense of smell shuts off. But he is right on line with what I experience when he says the auditory signals go next, followed by your vision, because that's the way it is for me as well. My ears click off. The very last things, it tends to be my eyes. Then my eyes shut off, and then it goes from just seeing lights and color patterns to just complete blackness. So that is condition C. Now at this point you're in the void state. He doesn't talk about the actual separation during his conditions A through D. This is basically to get to the point where you can reach up, as he says, out of the top of your head and pull the vibrations back down into your head. So that is after the completion of condition C. Now condition D is a little bit more difficult to achieve, and I personally have not achieved it. It's not necessary in order to achieve an out-of-body experience, but I think in order to make as much progress as I would like to make and to be where I would like to be one day, I think that it will be necessary. Condition D is the achievement of condition C when you're fully rested and refreshed, rather than tired and sleepy. Now, I have a really hard time. So everything we're going through here is called the direct method, right? It's the method of putting your body to sleep while you keep your mind awake. I have a really difficult time doing this if my body isn't somewhat tired. So 3 in the morning works great. Before bed works great. But once I get to like 6 a.m., I'm hopeless, and I can't do it at all during the day. I've only got 2 or 3 projections total under my belt during the day, and both of those came after working like a 48-hour shift and just being completely wrecked. So condition D is something that I have not been able to achieve very consistently, if at all. It's a hard thing for me to do. Typically what I do after the night is over is that I switch to the indirect method, and then I just try projecting immediately upon waking up, because that is it's a far easier approach for me once I'm getting into the early hours of the morning. But that is condition A through D. So like I said, once you're in C, that is the point where you strive to reach out and grab the vibrations. And I guess we can talk about that really quick. So Robert Monroe, if you haven't read his approach to doing this, what he says is focus on a point behind your closed eyelids, so out in front of you, approximately 3 feet away. So just forward and up slightly. So just kind of in front of your forehead, about 3 feet away. And then he says, take that point, once you've got that firmly fixed in your mind and it's very easy to visualize that point, push that point out to 6 feet in front of you until you can easily focus on that. And he talks about how the alignment of the points coming, between your eyes and crossing at a 6 foot point in front of you should cause some kind of pressure to build. And then he says, once you get to that point, then you actually slowly shift that point that's 6 feet out in front of you, shift it up over your head, just slightly back and up. And he says that's the point where you reach up and try to pull the vibrations into your head. Now that's a hard thing to really picture, and he recognizes that in his book. He says, so some questions may arise here. What am I supposed to be reaching with? What am I supposed to be pulling back? And it's one of those things where after you experience it, you know what it is. But this particular visualization, this looking out in front of you, shifting your point of awareness up, and then reaching with your point of awareness up out of your head, the more I experience and the more I think about this, and the more I hear other people's experiences, I think that what Bob was inadvertently doing, or maybe intentionally doing, and he just didn't talk about it this way, is instead of reaching up and grabbing the vibrations and pulling them into his head, what he was doing is he was shifting his point of awareness out of the top of his head, up and slightly back. And that's where he said he would find the vibrations. And I've mentioned before that this shifting of your point of awareness is one of the most effective ways that I can induce the vibrational state once I'm in that mind awake, body asleep, once I'm in the void state. So if I can shift my point of awareness, and it seems to be the magic spot is straight up and just back just slightly above the crown of my head, I reach my point of awareness up there and the vibrations kick in. So that may be what he perceived as reaching up and pulling them down. And I imagine that's because he talks about them starting in his head. For me, the vibrations always start in my lower spine, so it doesn't feel like I'm pulling them into my head. It feels more like my point of awareness shifts out of my body, and that causes this reaction to occur. So it's just some quick thoughts on that. But there are the focus levels. That is 1 through 49. As I've said a few times, please chime in, fill in all of the gaps, which I left very, very many. These are very subjective types of things, and I definitely don't have all the answers on it. But if you haven't looked at condition A through D, it's in his first book, Journeys Out of the Body. He also talks about the pulling the vibrations into your head. Definitely worth a look. It's a really good description of at least what you go through during the process. It doesn't tell you so much how to get there and what you need to do to achieve it, but it does tell you here's what you're going to experience, and I've found that to be right on. So I think that is it for today. As always, like, comment, subscribe, help me build this community. I will talk to you guys again soon.